Well, joining us is political analyst Dr. Ibbo Mandaza, who hopefully will help us unpack the situation in the country at the moment. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program. These by-elections shouldn't be so viciously contested, but they seem to be. What do you think is at the heart of the tensions that often play out in violent ways?
I think it has to do with the peculiar political situation in Zimbabwe. Unlike other parts of the country, of the region, it's clear that Zimbabwe is the odd one out. Elections have become battle zones, and they've been so since the early part of 2000. The population, election time is battle time, so to speak. And these by-elections appear to be no exception. Heavily contested, not so much the by-elections themselves, but really contestation between the ruling party and the opposition forces. It reflects a very defensive posture on the part of the system, a defensive posture that has been characteristic of the Zimbabwean polity, given that every election since 2002 has been disputed, and in a number of cases certainly won by the opposition, but with the opposition failing to take power or failed transition in each case. So we are back to square one. Only this time round it appears to be much more contentious and perhaps a little as violent as has been the case in 2008, for example.
We've seen the police being accused of torture, unfair treatment of opposition supporters and politicians. Do you think that the state and the authorities are coming out to bat for the ruling party in an unfair way?
It's very difficult to generalize because you see the police behaving differently and at different occasions. A case in point is the Kwekwe incident, where one of the 3C supporters was killed, if you remember. And the police moved so swiftly. Within hours, 17 people were arrested and identified to have been in a hideout in Kwekwe, a hideout which belonged to the former Minister of State for Security. So you had swift action by the police. And then, on the other hand, a week ago, the police stopped Shamisa from addressing a crowd in Marondera, unceremoniously, completely stopped him. And then yesterday, it appears Shamisa had a successful rally in Mutare, and I believe likewise in Mashingo this afternoon. So it's not very clear as to where the instructions are coming from, whether this has to do with local police action or local political leadership that might be in charge and are giving orders to police. It's not very clear, except that it speaks to or betrays deep-seated divisions within the state, within the state machinery in particular, within the state organs such as the police, and perhaps even within the army and other parts of the state apparatus. So it's not very encouraging what we are observing at the moment.
we've seen here in South Africa, sometimes when a political party has internal strife, it can manifest out there in the general public. I wonder if this might be the case in Zimbabwe with ZANU-PF, whether they're speaking on the same page, singing from the same hymn sheet, because you hear the president talking about, we want no violence, we want this to be a free and fair election, and then you hear the vice president saying that we will crush the opposition like lice. What do we make of this?
I think it has to do with, there are divisions within the ruling party, no doubt about that. And secondly, I think that being a secretocrat state that it is, one must expect, and this has been the case for the 20 years now, that the law enforcement agencies, the state security agencies, appear to have their own orbit of operation. They're almost like they are answerable to themselves, and depending on the particular circumstances or particular region, particular town, that it appears to depend on the officer in charge or the provincial officialdom in a given province. But it's clear that the security apparatus is at play. And if given that it's not united, it's not the divisions from the coup still prevail, no doubt about that. The coup itself reflected big divisions within the state, within the ruling party, and I'm afraid that those divisions have not healed. If anything, they've become exacerbated, more pronounced, and we don't know where that will lead us as we approach the by-elections this weekend, but more important, the 2023 elections.
Let's talk a little bit about the opposition. Morgan Tsvangirai was a really strong figure that stood out in front and was a voice perhaps of opposition politics. But then we saw with the 2008 elections splits starting to happen, and it never really recovered. And we've seen even more recently where fighting over the name of the party, fighting over the leadership of the party, and then eventually 3C stepping out of that completely and forming a whole new organization. How much of that is self-inflicted or maybe contributed, as some are speculating, state-sponsored, that the ZANU-PF and the government perhaps might be stoking the fires of division within the opposition parties in the country?
Yes, I think basically we have a very curious situation in Zimbabwe, if not a peculiar one, where the state, ever since the 80s, has regarded opposition as enemy number one. It's almost as if the one-party state mindset, DNA, has persisted throughout. Whether it was Edgar Tekere or Dumuchena's party, then the MDC itself, these have been regarded as outlaws. There's never been a genuine acceptance of the opposition or opposition politics. So the state machinery has always made its efforts to destroy, to decimate, to disorganize the opposition. And this time around, it's no difference at all. You saw, for example, you talked about the 3Cs, the emergence of the 3Cs. But the 3Cs are emerging against a background of 2 years of relentless onslaught by the state against the opposition. Recall of MPs, recall of councillors, the denial of parliamentary vote to the opposition, the confiscation, one might say, of the headquarters of the opposition. And virtually, almost as if it's almost surprising that Shamisa has been able to come up with it in the manner that he has so resoundingly in the last month, because everything was done to crush the opposition. They say that this mindset of a state which is intolerant of the opposition is a rather peculiar one, in the sense that in the region, generally, we learn to accept that opposition parties coexist with the ruling parties. That's the case certainly where you are in South Africa. It's the case in Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, even in Angola and Mozambique. But in Zimbabwe, it's just incredible that it's a mindset that one has to interrogate more closely. The sheer expectation by the state that as an opposition must be compliant, must be almost a branch of the ruling party. It's incredible, and that explains in part the level of violence in a state where conformity is supposed to be the order of the day, where opposition is reviewed as heresy. And we need to change that culture badly so. One hopes that the 2023 elections will bring about a change in the culture, such as we've seen in Zambia recently.
All right. Dr. Mandaza, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. Your insights greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Good night. All right, that's Dr. Ibbo Mandaza speaking to us ahead of the March 26 elections in Zimbabwe. They're by-elections and a few parliamentary seats, but the big fear is the elections that will take place in 2023, the national elections. And if these by-elections are a sign that they could be violent, people have fear about the elections of 2008, where after the first round of elections, there was what human rights groups have called state-sponsored violence that took place. And in fact, one incident, soldiers addressing villagers at meetings in Karoi and Mashonaland West went to villagers and said, if you vote for the MDC in the presidential runoff election, you have seen the bullets. We have enough for each one of you. So beware. So there are fears that levels of violence could increase as the stakes get higher and higher.